The year was 1973. In the broad, imposing avenues of Moscow, the Brezhnev-era zastoy, or stagnation, had settled over the Soviet Union like a heavy, gray blanket. It was an era of perceived stability, of predictable rhythms, but also of a quiet, pervasive tension. The détente with the West was a political headline, a game played by men in high positions. But on the streets, the ideological confrontation remained a fact of daily life, managed by the ever-present unseen hand of the State Security Committee, the KGB. In a standard apartment building on Prospect Mira lived Viktor Vasilyevich Orlov. At 42, Viktor was a man who exemplified the Soviet technical intelligentsia. He was a senior engineer at the Ministry of Radio Technology, a position of modest privilege. He was precise, analytical, and deeply apolitical. He believed in science, in tangible results, in the schematics and frequencies that governed his work. His apartment, shared with his wife, Elena Ivanovna, was a typical two-room flat, furnished with standard-issue pieces, the walls adorned with bookshelves holding Pushkin and technical manuals. The dominant smell was a faint, permanent mixture of wax floor polish and boiled cabbage. Viktor possessed one hobby that set him slightly apart. He was an avid amateur radio enthusiast. It was a complex and monitored pastime. His equipment was licensed, his call sign registered, and his logbooks meticulously maintained, subject to periodic inspection. He understood the rules: no contact with stations in ideologically hostile nations, no discussion of politics, only technical specifications and weather reports. For Viktor, it was not about communication. It was about the technology, the warm glow of vacuum tubes, the magic of pulling a clear signal from the static. Elena, 39, was a librarian. She was quieter than Viktor, more inclined toward literature than physics. She viewed the world with a cautious optimism, a belief in the fundamental decency of the system, even if she found its bureaucratic demands wearisome. They were a childless couple, devoted to each other and to their small managed existence. Their lives were defined by the queue, for bread, for shoes, for theater tickets. In May 1973, an opportunity arose that was almost unheard of for citizens of their standing. Viktor's department was sending a small delegation to a symposium on signal propagation in urban environments in Budapest, Hungarian People's Republic. Hungary was fraternal, a socialist ally, but it was still abroad. It was a land of different signposts, a hint of the West, known for its goulash communism, a slightly softer, more consumer-friendly model. Viktor's selection was a mark of professional esteem. But the true anomaly was the permission granted, after a lengthy application process through the ministry's first department, the internal KGB oversight, and OVIR, the visa office, for Elena to accompany him. It was framed as a cultural reward for his years of service. They would attend the 4-day conference, after which they were permitted 2 additional days for a restorative vacation at Lake Balaton, the Hungarian Sea. The news was met with a mixture of elation and a deep, unspoken anxiety. Their neighbor, Fedor Petrovich, a retired factory foreman who seemed to spend all his time in the communal stairwell, offered his congratulations with an enthusiasm that felt slightly too keen. Fedor was widely, though quietly, suspected of being a sexot, a secret informer for the local KGB precinct. "Budapest," he boomed, "a beautiful city. Be sure to bring back some good Hungarian salami. And remember, Comrade Orlov, your conduct reflects on us all." The privilege of travel was a tether. They were being allowed to see the world beyond the Soviet border, but the tether was short, and it was held by unseen hands. The vacation, this symbol of trust and reward, was, from its very inception, a test. The preparation for the trip was a bureaucratic marathon that overshadowed the excitement. It began not with guidebooks, but with briefings. Viktor and the other 3 engineers in his delegation were summoned to the ministry's first department, a sparse, intimidating office run by a man known only as Comrade Colonel Sitnikov. Sitnikov was pale and nondescript, but his eyes, behind thick glasses, were penetrating. He did not wish them a pleasant trip. He laid out the pravila, the rules. "Comrades," he began, his voice flat, "you are not traveling as private individuals. You are representatives of the Soviet Union. You will be observed by our friends and by our enemies. The Hungarian authorities are allies, but Western intelligence services are highly active in Budapest. They seek to compromise Soviet specialists. He outlined the protocols. They were forbidden from traveling anywhere alone, except between the hotel and the conference venue. All contact with foreigners, even socialist delegates from other nations, was to be reported in writing to the delegation leader, Comrade Tarasov. Tarasov was a party functionary from the ministry's personnel department, not an engineer, and his inclusion was explicitly for political hygiene. Accept no gifts, Sitnikov continued. Engage in no currency speculation. Do not discuss your work, even in general terms. Do not be provoked by political discussions. If a foreigner approaches you with inappropriate questions, you will disengage and report to Comrade Tarasov immediately. This includes émigrés or locals who may seem friendly. He looked directly at Victor. Engineer Orlov, your wife's inclusion is a significant dispensation. Her conduct is your responsibility. Ensure she understands these rules. Victor left the briefing with a cold knot in his stomach. The vacation felt less like a holiday and more like an operational deployment. Elena, meanwhile, was focused on the practical. She had traded favors with a clerk at the gum department store to acquire a new modest dress. She spoke of seeing the Danube, of trying gulyas, of perhaps finding a pair of fashionable Hungarian shoes, which were whispered to be of near Western quality. Her innocence was a stark contrast to the paranoid framework being built around them. The train journey from Moscow's Kievsky station was long. They shared a compartment with Tarasov, the political officer, who attempted a strained bonhomie while pointedly reading Pravda. He was a broad man with a fixed smile that did not reach his eyes. He made a point of collecting their passports and travel documents for safekeeping. Their arrival in Budapest was a sensory dislocation. Kaleti station was grand and old, bustling with a different energy. The language was impenetrable, a collection of sounds that offered no purchase for a Russian speaker. But more than that, the city felt brighter. The shops on Rakotsi Ut had window displays. There were small cafes, advertisements, a visible layer of consumerism that felt almost decadent. Victor saw posters for Western films. They were housed in the Hotel Gelair, a grand aging establishment on the Buda side of the river. It was chosen by the state travel agency, Intourist, precisely because it was large and easily monitored. The Orlov's room was spacious but austere, overlooking a courtyard. Victor immediately checked the telephone and the lamps for listening devices, a reflexive habit taught to all traveling specialists, though he knew the professional ones would be invisible to him. The first days of the symposium passed in a blur of technical jargon. Victor presented his paper on signal attenuation to a polite, reserved audience. He and Elena ate their meals with the delegation, Tarasov always directing the conversation toward safe topics. On the third afternoon, the schedule included a cultural excursion to Fisherman's Bastion. Elena, however, was feeling unwell, a headache from the heavy food. Tarasov decreed that Victor could not go alone, and Elena could not be left. They were, in effect, confined to the hotel until the evening's group dinner. A small seed of resentment, not at the rules but at the confinement, began to sprout in Victor. He was a trusted engineer, not a child. It was this feeling, a mild, unfamiliar frustration, that set the stage for what was to come. On the fourth and final day of the symposium, the afternoon session was canceled. The Hungarian hosts had arranged an impromptu tour of a local telecommunications facility. Comrade Tarasov, deeming it essential, decreed that all 4 engineers must attend. Victor, however, saw an opportunity. He pleaded a migraine, a mirror of Elena's ailment from the day before. He was convincing, perhaps because his anxiety was genuine. Tarasov looked at him with suspicion, but the schedule was tight. "Very well, Orlov," he said, his voice clipped. "Remain in the hotel. Do not leave. We will return by 17. The moment the delegation's bus pulled away, Victor felt a surge of liberation. Elena was reading in their room. "I'm going for a short walk, Leonochka," he said. "Just to get some air for my head. Be careful, Vitya," she murmured, not looking up. "Don't be long." But Victor was not going for air. He was going to the Exeri Piach, the large flea market on the outskirts of the city. He had read about it in a small, state-approved pamphlet on Budapest. It was a place where one could find old treasures, and for Victor, treasure meant antique radio components. He told himself it was harmless. He was a technician, a hobbyist. This was cultural, not political. He took a taxi, a minor infraction of the rules, paying with the small amount of forint he had officially exchanged. The market was a sprawling, chaotic universe of discarded history. Vendors sold Habsburg-era porcelain, Nazi memorabilia, faded peasant blouses, and mountains of junk. Victor was in his element. He navigated the stalls, his eyes scanning for the distinct shape of pre-war electronics. After an hour, he found it, a 1940s-era Orion 331 radio, its wooden veneer chipped, its fabric speaker cover stained. It was a Hungarian model he had only seen in textbooks. He haggled with the old woman running the stall, a purely transactional, apolitical exchange. He bought the heavy radio for a handful of bills and, feeling a small thrill of successful acquisition, took a taxi back to the Galère. He smuggled the radio into the room under his coat. Elena was asleep. He placed his prize on the desk and began his inspection. He was an engineer. He loved to see how things were built. He used his pocket tool, a small screwdriver and pliers, to remove the back panel. Inside it was dusty, a spider's web clinging to a large vacuum tube. But something was wrong. In the space where the battery pack would have sat, there was a small, custom-fitted wooden block. It looked newer than the rest of the internals. Curious, he worked it loose with his screwdriver. Underneath was a hollowed-out compartment, and inside that, nestled in cotton wool, was a small, cylindrical metal canister, no bigger than his thumb. It was cold to the touch. This was not a radio component. His heart began a low, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He looked at the door, ensuring it was locked. Elena was still breathing softly on the bed. With trembling fingers, he unscrewed the cap of the canister. Inside was a tightly wound spool of film. It was not photographic film. It was microfilm. Victor, as a senior engineer in a sensitive ministry, had seen microfilm before. It was the medium of archives, of blueprints, and of intelligence. He retrieved the high-powered magnifying loupe he used for examining circuit boards from his briefcase. He unspooled a short length of the film and held it to the light of the desk lamp, pressing the loupe to his eye. His technical mind expected schematics, perhaps for the radio itself, but what he saw made the blood drain from his face. It was not pictures, it was text, columns of it. The first frame was a series of 5-figure code groups. The next frame appeared to be a list of names, formatted with dates and locations. The locations were not Hungarian. He recognized the Cyrillic abbreviations for military districts within the Soviet Union. He was holding a dead drop. He, Viktor Orlov, loyal Soviet engineer, had accidentally stumbled into an active espionage operation. He had just purchased a container filled, he could only assume, with state secrets intended for a Western handler. He dropped the film as if it were burning. He frantically screwed the canister shut. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He was in possession of treason. Victor's mind, usually so orderly and analytical, fractured into 1,000 panicked thoughts. His first instinct was to destroy it, burn it. But how? The film wouldn't burn easily. Flushing it. The canister was metal. His second thought was to report it. He would go to Tarasov, explain the innocent purchase, the discovery. But the words of Colonel Sitnikov echoed in his mind. Accept no gifts. Engage in no currency speculation. Do not travel alone. He had broken all 3 rules. He had gone to a market alone, paid a local for an item, and accepted it. He could already see the interrogation. Why this radio, Comrade Orlov? Why did you really go to the market? Who did you meet? You, a radio specialist, expect us to believe you accidentally found a hidden compartment. His truth was absurd. It was unbelievable. And in the logic of the first department, unbelievable meant a lie. He looked at Elena, sleeping peacefully. He had implicated her. By bringing this thing into their room, he had endangered her. He had to get rid of it. But how and when? Tarasov and the delegation would be back soon. He reassembled the radio, carefully placing the wooden block and the canister back inside. He pushed the radio under his bed, a temporary, terrible solution. When the delegation returned, Victor was pale and sweating. "Your migraine appears worse, Orlov," Tarasov noted, his eyes scanning Victor's face. "It is the air, the humidity," Victor stammered. That evening, at the farewell dinner for the symposium, Victor could not eat. He felt a constant prickling sensation on his neck, the feeling of being watched. Every polite smile from their Hungarian hosts seemed to hide an accusation. He glanced at the other tables. Was that man in the corner, the one nursing a single drink, watching him? He had seen him in the hotel lobby that morning. He was not wrong. He was, in fact, being watched by 3 separate groups. The first was the Alamvédelmi Hatóság, or AVH, the Hungarian secret police. The flea market stall was a known location. The old woman was one of their informants. The AVH had been aware for months that the stall was being used as a dead drop by someone, likely a Western intelligence operative. They had seen Victor, a Soviet citizen whose papers identified him as a technical specialist, make the purchase. They had photographed him. They assumed he was the courier. They were now observing him, waiting to see if he would make contact with his handler. The second group was the Western handler, a cultural attaché from the French embassy. He too had been watching the stall. He had seen Victor, a civilian, buy the radio. His operation was blown. The package was compromised. He was now simply observing the fallout, reporting back to his station that the drop was a burn. The third group, and the most dangerous, was the local KGB Rezidentura stationed in Budapest, operating from the Soviet embassy. The AVH, as allies, had passed on their surveillance photos of Victor to their Soviet comrades as a professional courtesy. The KGB was now also watching engineer Orlov. They did not share the AVH's assumption that he was a courier. They operated on a more sinister principle. He was either a fool or a traitor, and the KGB did not believe in fools. Victor Orlov, the harmless hobbyist, was now the central figure in an invisible war, and he didn't even know it. All he knew was that the radio under his bed felt like a radioactive isotope, poisoning his room, his marriage, and his life. The next morning, the delegation was scheduled to depart for Lake Balaton. The symposium was over. The 2-day vacation had begun. Victor had not slept. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the canister a leaden weight in his mind. He had to bring the radio. He couldn't leave it in the hotel room for a cleaner to find. The risk of discovery was too great. He wrapped the bulky Orion set in his spare pajamas and packed it at the bottom of his suitcase, hoping Elena wouldn't notice the strange item or the extra weight. She was too preoccupied with the excitement of seeing the famous lake to pay him much attention. The delegation, plus Elena, took a train to Siofok, the largest resort town on the lake's southern shore. They were checked into the Hotel Europa, a modern, concrete block building reserved for socialist tourists. Tarasov, his official duties technically over, announced that they were free to enjoy the fraternal comforts, but reminded them that they were still a group and they would meet for all meals. The atmosphere should have been relaxing. The vast, shallow lake was milky green under the summer sun. Families from East Germany and Czechoslovakia populated the small beach. But for Victor, it was a landscape of terror. Every vacationer could be an observer. Every shadow held a threat. He was trapped. He couldn't get rid of the canister on the train. He couldn't in the hotel. He had to find a moment alone, a place of isolation. On their first afternoon, Elena announced she wanted to lie by the water. Victor, claiming an upset stomach, said he would stay in the room. The moment she left, he retrieved the canister from the radio. He pocketed it. The radio itself was a secondary problem. The film was the core of his predicament. He left the room, telling the floor attendant he was going to the pharmacy. He walked past the manicured hotel lawns, past the families, and headed down the shoreline, away from the main resort. He walked for nearly a mile, his pace quickening, until he found a deserted stretch of reeds and a small, rickety wooden pier used by local fishermen. The sun was beginning to dip. The lake was calm. He was alone. He pulled the metal canister from his pocket. His hands were slick with sweat. He weighed it in his palm. This small object had become the fulcrum of his life. He decided he would throw it as far as he possibly could into the deep water. They would never find it. He would go back to the hotel, and in Moscow he would burn the radio piece by piece. He would be free. He drew his arm back, putting his full weight into the throw. "I would not do that, Viktor Vasilyevich." The voice was quiet, calm, and spoke perfect, unaccented Russian. Viktor froze. He turned, his arms still raised. Two men were standing at the entrance to the pier, silhouetted against the setting sun. They were dressed in unremarkable dark suits, identical in their anonymity. They were not Hungarian. They did not look like tourists. Who are you?" Viktor whispered, his throat closing. "We are comrades," the first man said, stepping forward. The other remained behind, blocking the only exit. "Concerned comrades. You have found something that does not belong to you." It was not a question. Viktor's hand, still holding the canister, began to tremble violently. "That item is the property of the Soviet state," the man continued, his voice devoid of emotion. He held out his hand. "Give it to me, please." Viktor's mind raced. Were they saviors? Were they from the embassy? Could he explain? I found it," he stammered. "In a radio, at the market. I didn't know what to do." The man's expression did not change. "You found it." "At the Ekseri Piak, yesterday, at 14:32. Yes, we know. We also know you did not report it to your delegation leader. You concealed it, you transported it, and now you are attempting to destroy it. Those are the facts." The casual recitation of his movements struck Viktor with the force of a physical blow. They had seen everything. "It was a mistake," Viktor pleaded, his voice breaking. "An accident." "There are no accidents, Engineer Orlov," the man said. He took another step. "Only actions. Give me the canister." Viktor's fingers uncurled. He held out the small metal cylinder. The man took it, not with his fingers, but by producing a handkerchief and carefully enveloping the canister before placing it in his coat pocket. "You will come with us," the man said. "There are some questions that need to be answered." "My wife, Elena, she is at the hotel," Viktor said, a new, sharper panic rising. "Your wife will be informed that you have been recalled," the first man said. The second man stepped aside, gesturing toward a black Volga sedan parked almost invisibly in the shade of a nearby tree line. "No, please," Viktor begged. "It's a misunderstanding. I am a loyal citizen. I am an engineer." "That," the first man said, his voice finally carrying a trace of ice, "is precisely why we are concerned." The confrontation was over. It had been bloodless, efficient, and total. As they led him to the car, Viktor Orlov looked back at the placid, shimmering surface of Lake Balaton, the symbol of his holiday, now the witness to the end of his life as he knew it. The term arrest implies a legal process, a reading of rights, a formal charge. What happened to Viktor Orlov was an extraction. The black Volga was silent inside, the heavy upholstery absorbing all sound. Viktor sat in the back, flanked by the two men. He was not restrained, but the pressure of their presence was more effective than any handcuffs. They drove not back toward Budapest, but to a small, secluded dacha nestled in the hills north of the lake, a property unmarked and surrounded by a high fence. It was a secure location, a safe house maintained by the KGB's Residentura for special operations on Allied soil. Back at the Hotel Europa, Elena returned from the beach as the sun set. The room was empty. She assumed Viktor was still at the pharmacy or perhaps walking. She showered and dressed for the group dinner. At 19:02, she went to the dining hall. Tarasov and the other engineers were already at their table. "Where is your husband, Orlova?" Tarasov asked, his irritation plain. I am not sure," Elena said, her own anxiety beginning to rise. "He went for a walk." Tarasov scowled. By 20 pine, Viktor had not returned. Tarasov's irritation turned to visible anger. He made a call from the hotel manager's office. An hour later, as Elena sat in the hotel lobby, close to tears, Tarasov approached her. He was accompanied by one of the men from the pier. The man's face was grim. "Elena Ivanovna," Tarasov began, his voice formal and cold. "A serious situation has developed. Your husband, Engineer Orlov, has been recalled to Moscow for urgent state consultations. Elena stared at him. Recalled? Now? What? What do you mean? Is he all right? Comrade Orlov has committed a grave error in judgment, Tarasov said, avoiding her eyes. He has complicated matters for the delegation. He is already en route, but his things, his suitcase, you will pack his belongings immediately. You will pack your own. The other man interjected, his voice carrying an authority that silenced her. You are returning to Moscow on the 7:00 flight tomorrow. You will be escorted. The vacation was over. The clinical, brutal efficiency of the state apparatus had descended. Elena was moved to a different room for the night, one with no external phone line. She packed their bags in a state of terrified confusion. She found the old Orion radio under the bed. It seemed to mock her. She packed it too, thinking it was just a souvenir, unaware of the poison it had contained. Victor, meanwhile, was not en route to Moscow. He was sitting in a bare room in the dacha, a single bright light shining on his face. The man who had taken the canister, who introduced himself only as Major, began the first preliminary interrogation. It was not violent. It was precise. Who was your contact at the market? What was the recognition signal? How were you compensated? Victor's denials, his frantic, truthful story of the flea market, were met with a patient, dismissive silence. Viktor Vasilievich, the major said, do not waste our time. The evidence is in our possession. Your only path forward is full cooperation. The next morning, Victor was flown from a Hungarian military airfield back to the Soviet Union. He did not pass through a civilian terminal. He landed at Chkalovsky, a military base outside Moscow. A windowless van was waiting on the tarmac. Elena's journey was different. She was flown on a commercial Aeroflot flight, but she was never alone. A cultural attaché from the embassy sat beside her, polite and silent. When she landed at Sheremetyevo, she was met not by Victor, but by two men in suits who took her passport and guided her to a car. They took her home to the apartment on Prospect Mira. They also took the suitcase containing the radio. They told her to wait, to speak to no one. Her life, once predictable and secure, was now in free fall, and she had no idea why. Viktor Orlov was driven not to his ministry, but to a forbidding yellow building in Moscow, Lefortovo prison. It was the KGB's primary pretrial isolation facility. He was processed, stripped of his civilian clothes, given a prison uniform, and placed in cell 42. Lefortovo was not a place of physical brutality. Its methods were psychological, designed to dismantle a subject's perception of reality. There was no night or day. A bright light in the cell was on 24 hours. Sleep was permitted only in 4-hour blocks. The silence was absolute. His interrogator, Major Grigory Krupkin, was a different man from the one in Hungary. Krupkin was older, with the weary face of a bureaucratic functionary. He treated the interrogation not as a confrontation, but as a problem of paperwork. Viktor Vasilievich, Krupkin said during their first session, in a sterile room furnished only with a table and 2 chairs. We have a file. The file has a discrepancy. You are a senior engineer. You were given the privilege of foreign travel, and you chose to betray that trust. My job is to resolve this discrepancy. Victor told his story. The hobby, the flea market, the radio, the discovery, the panic. Krupkin listened patiently, taking notes. When Victor finished, Krupkin tapped his pencil. A good story. Creative. But it is not the truth. Let us examine the truth. He laid out the facts, as the investigation had already decided them. Fact. You are a radio specialist. You have technical knowledge of frequencies and communication. Fact. You violated delegation protocol to travel alone to a known rendezvous point. Fact. You acquired a package using a prearranged purchase method. Fact. You concealed this package from your wife and your political officer. Fact. You attempted to destroy the package when you believed you were compromised. This is not the profile of a tourist, Krupkin said, his voice mild. This is the tradecraft of an agent. A clumsy agent, perhaps, but an agent. For weeks the interrogation continued. It was a conveyor. Krupkin would work on him for 8 hours, then another interrogator would take over, asking the same questions. Then another. Victor's sense of time dissolved. His story, the truth, began to sound thin and ridiculous, even to him. "It was an accident," he would insist, his voice hoarse. "Accidents are for children, Orlov," Krupkin would reply. "We are adults here. We are engineers. We believe in cause and effect. The effect is, you were in possession of state secrets. Now tell me the cause. Who recruited you? Was it in Moscow? Was it one of your radio contacts?" Victor's hobby, once a source of pride, was now the primary evidence against him. His radio logs were scrutinized. A contact in Poland, a fellow hobbyist he'd spoken to 2 years prior, was now framed as a potential foreign handler. The pressure was relentless. He was told Elena was also under suspicion, that her fate depended on his honesty. After a month, sleep-deprived and psychologically broken, Viktor Orlov entered a state of cooperation. Krupkin helped him craft a new narrative. Perhaps he hadn't been recruited, not formally. Perhaps he had been curious. Perhaps he had seen the film, recognized its value, and intended to... what? Keep it. Sell it. Victor, desperate to end the torment, signed a prepared statement. It was a masterpiece of ambiguity. It confessed to violations of state security protocols, unauthorized contact with unknown parties, and criminal negligence resulting in the compromise of state materials. It was, in effect, a full confession. The trial was a formality, held in absentia by a closed military tribunal, a troika. Victor was not present. He was represented by a state-appointed lawyer he never met. The charge was Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, treason. The tribunal's logic was simple. The microfilm canister was a container for state secrets. By attempting to destroy it, Victor had demonstrated intent to conceal espionage. His signed confession, detailing his negligence, was interpreted as an admission of his role in the affair. The sentence was predetermined. It was the only sentence Article 64 truly offered for such a case, the highest measure of social protection. The file was stamped, closed, and sent to the archives. While Victor was being systematically dismantled in Lefortovo, Elena was living in a state of suspended animation. For 2 weeks after her return, she heard nothing. She went to the Ministry of Radio Technology, but she was stopped at the door. Her propusk, her entry pass, was no longer valid. She was directed to the personnel office. A nervous-looking administrator told her she was relieved of her duties at the library. The reason given was staff reduction. She knew it was a lie. She was now the wife of an unperson. The isolation was immediate and total. Her neighbors, including Fadir, now looked through her when she passed them in the stairwell. The telephone, which she had once used to chat with friends, remained silent. To call her was to risk association. A few days later, 2 men from the building committee, accompanied by a militsioner, knocked on her door. They informed her that her 2-room apartment was too large for a single citizen. She was being reallocated to a communal apartment across town in a grim industrial district. She was given 48 hours to move, permitted to take only what she could carry. Her life, her identity, was being erased along with Victor's. 1 month after her return from Hungary, she received the only official communication she would ever get. It was a small, plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet of gray paper, folded. It was not a letter. It was a formal notification from the Military Collegium of the Supreme Court. Citizen Orlova EI, this is to inform you that your husband, Viktor Vasilievich Orlov, born 1931, has been tried and convicted under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, treason against the motherland. The sentence, the highest measure of protection, was pronounced. The sentence has been carried out. There was no date of the event, no location, no details, and, most chillingly, no possibility of appeal. The words "carried out" were a bureaucratic euphemism for a final, irreversible act. Elena collapsed. The ambiguity was, perhaps, the most terrible part. The system had not just taken her husband, it had swallowed him, leaving not even a grave to visit. The vacation, the prize they had so looked forward to, had been a trap. Her mild headache in Budapest, Victor's innocent desire to see a market, These were the small, mundane hinges on which their entire world had swung and then shattered. She was forced to move to the communal apartment, sharing a kitchen and bathroom with 4 other families. She found work as a cleaner, a uborshchitsa, scrubbing floors in a factory. She was a pariah, the wife of an enemy of the people. She wrote letters to the Procurator General, to the chairman of the Supreme Soviet. She pleaded Victor's innocence, his loyalty, his character. The letters were never answered. They were simply filed away, attached to his case file as further evidence of her own unreliability. The system, having identified an anomaly, had corrected it with brutal finality. The case of Viktor Orlov was closed. Years melted into decades. Elena Ivanovna Orlova survived. She aged, her quiet optimism replaced by a resilient, hardened grief. She lived through the remainder of Brezhnev's rule, the brief tenures of Andropov and Chernenko, and then the Great Shift. In 1989, the Soviet Union was in the grip of glasnost and perestroika. The Berlin Wall fell. The past, once a forbidden, monolithic bloc, was beginning to crack. The state was beginning to speak, tentatively, about its past mistakes. A new government body was formed, the Commission for the Rehabilitation of Victims of Political Repression. Elena, now in her late 50s, her hands calloused from years of scrubbing, applied. She had kept only 2 things from her old life: her wedding ring and the cold, formal notification of Victor's fate. She filled out the forms, her hand shaking slightly, requesting a review of Case 214A Orlov V.V. Her case was assigned to a young, reform-minded investigator named Pavel, a man who had joined the security services in this new era and still believed in the concept of justice. He was granted access to the archives at the Lubyanka. He found the file. It was thin. It contained Victor's initial registration as a radio hobbyist, the report from Colonel Sitnikov authorizing the travel, the surveillance photos from the AVH in Budapest, the report from the KGB Rezidentura in Hungary, the interrogation transcripts from Lefortovo, signed by Major Krupkin, the signed confession, and the 1-page Troika verdict. But as Pavel dug deeper into the supplemental archives, those containing communications between state security agencies, he found something else. He found a telex, dated December 1973, 5 months after Victor's removal. It was a follow-up report from the Hungarian AVH to the KGB. The Hungarians, continuing their own investigation, had successfully rolled up the Western intelligence ring. They had observed the actual French attaché attempting to retrieve a different package from the same flea market stall. The attaché had been declared persona non grata and expelled. The Hungarian report, in its bureaucratic summary, noted that the ring's operation had been temporarily disrupted in July by the accidental interception of a package by a Soviet tourist, V.V. Orlov, who was subsequently recalled by your services. Pavel felt a chill. The Hungarians, their partners, had confirmed Victor's story. They knew he was an accidental interception. He cross-referenced the dates. This telex had arrived after Victor's confession had been extracted, but before his final sentencing. Major Krupkin, or his superiors, had seen this telex. They had known, with a high degree of certainty, that Viktor Orlov was not a spy. He was exactly what he claimed to be, an unlucky hobbyist. But the confession was already on file. The case was already solved. Major Krupkin had already been commended for vigilance in unmasking a deep-cover agent. To reverse the case would be to admit a failure, a mistake. It would undermine the infallibility of the organs. It was procedurally, ideologically, impossible. The system had prioritized its own narrative over the life of a man. Viktor Orlov was not condemned for treason. He was condemned for administrative convenience. In 1990, Elena Orlova received a second and final piece of paper from the state. It was not a gray notification, but a crisp white certificate. It declared that, upon review, Viktor Vasilyevich Orlov had been fully exonerated of all charges due to a lack of evidence of a crime. He was, it stated, rehabilitated posthumously. The legacy of Viktor Orlov was not one of espionage, but of systemic paranoia. He was a case study in the central tragedy of the Cold War, not the clash of armies, but the crushing of the individual by the abstract machinery of ideology. Victor's story was not about the microfilm. Its contents were, in the end, irrelevant. It was about a system so consumed by the fear of infiltration that it saw enemies everywhere, and in doing so, it became its own worst enemy. The apparatus designed to protect the Soviet man had developed a logic where the man himself was disposable, but the integrity of the process was paramount. Victor's mistake was not buying a radio. His mistake was being human. He panicked. He tried to solve his own problem, to hide his minor infraction, unaware that he had stumbled onto a stage where only one script was permitted. In this theater, innocence was not a defense. It was simply an unconvincing performance. The death sentence of the title was not just the physical act pronounced by the tribunal. It was the social and emotional sentence passed on Elena. It was the sentence of erasure from public record, the sentence of silence imposed on his colleagues, and the sentence of fear that kept neighbors like Fadir looking away. Elena lived to see the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the state that had both educated her and destroyed her. The certificate of rehabilitation gave her no comfort. It was just a word. It could not return the 17 years of her life spent in isolation and grief. It could not answer the one question that remained: where was he? The archives, even in their new openness, were silent on that final personal detail. He had been removed, and the system, in its final act of bureaucratic tidiness, had tidied away his remains. The vacation to Budapest was a memory of a different life, a dream that had ended in an unmarked grave.